Cassandra was not the only one who saw it coming. I had a professor when I was in my first round of graduate school. It's a very expensive hobby that I have. But my professor, Dr. Orrin Pilkey, was a Cassandra. He was an expert on the movement of barrier islands and coastline erosion. And he had a theory, well hated by many, that the beaches were eroding and that people should stop trying to keep them from moving because that was making it worse. Now, in a state such as North Carolina, which makes a great deal of its income off of tourism on the coastline, and where many people have treasured second homes, this was not a popular stance to have. Seawalls and property should be protected, folks thought, and he kept saying, "You're gonna regret that." And I thought of so many people a couple weeks ago when we saw the hurricane come through, but one of them I thought of was Dr. Pilkey. I realized how crazy it seems now that it was controversial to understand that barrier islands, which are basically just large piles of sand, would move. Of course, people did not want to believe that, but because they were also places of great revenue and pleasure. But yet, even in the face of these red-hot truths, the people said, "No way." And we saw some of what would happen. When we speak about climate change, it is redundant and not convincing to tell people the facts. Consider this from the satirical publication, The Onion. Here's the headline: "The time to act is now," says yellowing climate change report sitting in university archive. Dateline, Berkeley, California. "Warning society that it has reached a crucial tipping point from which it may never be able to recover. A brittle, yellowing report sits in the archives of the University of California's Bioscience and Natural Resource Library, reportedly urging readers Friday that the time to act against climate change is right now, several decades ago." And it was probably right. The time to act is right now. And the people say, let's wait for more evidence. Now, this is officially known as the Cassandra phenomenon, and it's not unfamiliar to us. It's very much at the heart of what is happening with climate change and with a few other issues in our world today. Those who would deny climate change do not dispute the facts. They mostly, though some do, mostly they just choose to ignore them. Despite the warming of the days and the flooding of the towns, despite the increased numbers of storms, we see that people continue to say that climate change is not real. We have also seen, perhaps, this Cassandra phenomenon, tragically, in this debate that we have just closed as a nation about our Supreme Court and who should sit on our Supreme Court. We have disregarded the Cassandras who would say that it is damaging to our nation to devolve a debate about who should sit on the highest court of our land into an ideological debate about bully politics and their right to prevail. I am reminded of a scene from a Steve Martin movie. I really have not seen many Steve Martin movies, but of all the movie scenes I've seen, I think this is the one that sticks in my brain the most. He is standing before the portrait of his dead wife, about to ask permission to date another woman. And he says, if she has any concerns about his having feelings for this other woman, she should send him a sign. The pictures start to shake, the frame starts to twirl around, the wall cracks, and her voice is heard wailing, "No, no, no." And he looks back at the portrait and says, "Just give me a sign, any sign. I'll be on the lookout for it." This is the dilemma that Cassandras face. The power to deny is true. And it is true that denial is not just a river in Egypt, and Cassandra isn't the only seer whose truths are disregarded. You know, that ridiculous scene from the movie does not seem that far-fetched. If you look at the red-hot truths about climate change and global warming, and the truth that we are all interconnected, for that is also what has been at the heart of this conversation in our nation over these last painful weeks. As one international council put it, scientific evidence for the warming of the climate system is completely unilateral. NASA's climate change research, which is soon to be defunded, cites global temperature rise, warming oceans, shrinking ice sheets, glacial retreat, decreased snow cover, ocean acidification, and sea level rise. They're all well documented. Oh, and we now see this pattern of nightmarish storms and summers when fires rack our state. Hurricanes and floodings for others, and extreme weather events are also part of this package. How can this all be ignored? The Cassandra phenomenon refers to the idea that truth can be professed and we can choose to ignore that truth. We know this is true. We see it in so many different aspects of our lives, and if we're honest about ourselves, we all have a little bit of Cassandra's, ignoring the Cassandras of our own, in our own personal lives as well. At a simple level, it is what happens when we tell someone they need to eat better or go for a run or not leave their prized possessions out in the rain. And when the scurvy sets in or the furniture is ruined, saying, "I told you so," because the facts supported us, is neither effective or appreciated. We are as guilty of ignoring Cassandra as those who would deny climate change. We can be judgmental about them. We can be derisive and self-righteous about this. And what we will do if we engage only in those behaviors is we are likely to separate ourselves even further, likely to disempower ourselves even further from the individual who needs to take better care of themselves or their things, or the policy makers who are as devoted to their agenda of denial as we are devoted to our agenda of truth. It is hard for us, as a people who have truth as one of our religious principles, to understand that it is not about teaching facts, and that more facts are actually probably not going to help us, because how many people are already feeling overwhelmed by the facts I just listed? This is not helpful at some level. It is really about changing hearts and showing what can be done in the face of fear. People have been trying to bring us this message for many years. And as Bill said in the call to worship, we've been, this congregation and Tony Newey and Art Ungar and Dee Simmons have been the Cassandras among us for many years. If you want to see the original documents, the letters that were written to propose the study action issue, they're on the history table in the alcove today. So take a moment to read them. Teilhard de Chardin, in the last century, was a Cassandra who was fascinated by things scientific, despite his chosen career as a Catholic priest. He wrote, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." His writings would ultimately be banned by the church because in them, among other things, he and a colleague coined the term noosphere for referring to a particular form of conscious life which is, in some ways, he believed, separate from the biosphere. He predicted that this kind of intelligence would someday allow global communication, so some believe that he was the godfather of the internet. But he predicted that this intelligence could actually be the unmaking of the planet, unless it was coupled with ethics and values which recognize our fierce interdependence. He called humans matter at its most incendiary stage. Matter at its most incendiary stage. So let us not continue to ignore the exhausted Cassandras among us. We can say that the people who do not believe in climate change are ignorant. We can curse them, and in fact, we probably do need to express some anger about this and the other issues of ignorance we have seen in our face these last couple weeks. And yet at the same time, we are just as guilty of our own version of the Cassandra phenomenon as anyone else. It's a little different. I'll get to that in a moment. We may believe that it's happening, but our particular denial of the truth might be that we can make any difference to stop it. This is where we play Cassandra, ignoring what we can do because we cannot control all that is around us and all that we do not like. It is important for us to show up today, which is why I'm grateful for each and every one of you, because we need to be faithful and continue to find those ways to flex our muscles so that when the tides turn, as they will, we will be ready to step back into full commitments, for we now know better than we have ever known what could be lost. Ultimately, we need to say that we do not know what can be done. But we do know that it takes 17 residents of Ghana to have the carbon footprint of one United States citizen. We are by far the most intensive resource users, and we are by far the most intensive abusers of our planet. The question becomes whether we are willing to stop being driven by consumption and this ethic of consumption which is rapidly overriding all other values in our nation, or whether we are willing to step up and make some very conscious choices. It might be to fly 2 times less a year, or to take public transit when we can. It might be to eat meat 1 less meal a week, or to get out and make sure that everyone in our families can vote and will vote. The folks at Climate X, which is a consortium looking at climate change at MIT, believes that it will be the leadership of countries like ours to decide if we are willing to drastically reduce our incomes and our consumption that will ultimately decide whether or not we address climate change and leave a planet to our children and grandchildren. Climate change blogger Andrew Revkin wrote, "We have been in puberty as a species." And author Krista Tippett said, "And science is telling us it is time to grow up." Revkin also shared this: "One of the other tough realities with issues like climate change is that it violates all the norms of the kind of things we actually do pay attention to. You're only going to have attraction when you have a true sense of global community, when you know that what you do to our atmosphere matters, because that is a shared treasure upon which we are all dependent." And evolutionary biologist David Sloan Wilson says, "It is our mental models which constrain us, not the facts, not our knowledge, not even our resources." He says cultural evolution can produce a field of behaviors that enables humans to adapt to all environments. That's why we're spread all over the planet, and we can always be in any new environment. We adapt, but it's only because we have this flexible system of symbolic thought that we can adapt. It's why we qualify as a new evolutionary process and why we became the dominant species on Earth, for better or for worse. And then he adds, "And there's a lot of worse in there." So we Cassandra ignorers, who think if we keep spouting facts we'll overcome those we disdain, should listen again to David Revkin, who says, "How much warming is too much for our globe is not a science question. One of the other tough realities with issues like climate change is that it violates all the norms of the kind of things we actually do pay attention to, which are usually near and now. You're only going to have attraction when you have a true sense of that we are all in this together. When faced with these issues, which may seem too hot to handle, be it climate change or a Supreme Court which we now will not be able to rely upon as a backstop for human rights, we must grieve and acknowledge our anger and move into action to protect those most vulnerable. For the truth is, it has become more important that we not fall victim to that second form of Cassandra ignoring, that inaction. Because not only did the citizens of Troy ignore Cassandra's warning, they also ignored what they could have done to save themselves from the fate that she predicted. We can sit in our despair, or we can do what we can, trying out new technologies and readying them for adoption when we can mandate that. We can talk about our values and our concerns in our families, out in the world, and in the halls of democracy. We can decide there's nothing to be done and just consume ourselves and the planet to death, or we can do a simple Google search, and I promise you, there are many, many, many concrete choices we can make. We can recognize and teach our children to respect all life through simple rituals such as the blessing of our animals. We can recommit to educating about interdependence and do it in ways that call people in and not call people out. Our braggart spending of our excess around the world through media and other means is one of the surest paths to destruction, for we are inviting others to be like us, and we are the least sustainable. And if we cannot rely on the court to be a step ahead of our legislators at all levels in these times when community connection and our recognition of our interdependence is so important, then we need to get out and work to reclaim our elected halls. We have 29 days to election, folks. 29 days. When faced with times when the truth feels too fiery hot to handle, we do still have a choice, which is to do what we can, to continue to live deeper into what we believe, and to be ready for that time when we might again have the ability to influence the highest level of decisions. We also need to listen to the real fears of those who are around us and to our own fears, and to provide a way to engage with them. And we need to nurture the Cassandras among us, those prophetic people and groups which are protecting the heritage seeds of universal love. It warms my heart to see every person who is in this sanctuary today, because by coming you have chosen hope. And I know in the churches of many traditions today, the rooms are full, because people who have been oppressed know that when times get tough, you come together. You do not isolate. You do not give in to your hopelessness. You reach out, you connect, and you restore yourself through community. So let us guard close here the seeds of hope and water them with our everyday choices. We, who know that this world is too precious to lose, must choose to hold it closer. So may it be.